on my way.
So you've learned how to throw a punch, and how to avoid one. Your holds are bursting with shiny toys, and your mechs are chock full of space-saving tech, sitting in the hangar empty and waiting. Or maybe you've just opened up the mech bay for the first time, and feel overwhelmed with the volume of customization options. How do you build your mech? If you are looking for a cheat sheet, quick fix guide to this topic, turn the car around because you won't find one. The best I can offer in this vein is maximize armor, stay heat neutral. Not because it is the best way to build a mech, but it will at least give you something usable. For those of us who appreciate more nuanced answers, there's the rest of this video. Like so many things in life, it depends is the generic answer that remains correct. The nature of the game is that you might be able to locate the bestest, most uber mech slang build somewhere on the internet and have said build be completely worthless because you don't have access to the items needed to flesh out the kit. Mercenary life means a fuck ton of duct tape. Fucked tape. Because somewhere along the way, somebody had to replace a Gauss rifle with an AC-2 and a poor paint job. It might have been the previous administration, but it will most certainly be you, so you might as well learn the fundamentals of good mech design, so that when somebody snaps a photo of that clan ERPPC grinding your lap, you'll have the poise to smile instead of grope about randomly. Warning, there will be lots of information. Take your time. Pause the video, rewatch sections, come back after some trial and error. It's a big ask to compress multiple thousands of hours of IP experience into a single video, but I'm going to try. The first consideration is that your preferred command style affects which types of builds will perform for your tactics. If you love to deliver pain up close and personal, that Gauss rifle is going to be a liability, your LRM's worthless. Your lumbering Atlas that wields a double-headed mace with urban mechs attached to the ends will be limited to the carnival tent, unless you stuff it to the gills with engine. So before you even step into the mech lab, you need to decide your battlefield strategy. Or at least, you need to have an idea. Early in your career, the tech you have at your disposal will absolutely dictate your strategy, as your options are too limited to make many changes. A good commander will adjust their tactics to their resources, as they fluctuate up or down. A great commander will seek out the resources that enable their fighting style. This is why it's important to have a vision in your head about how you wish your company to engage, so that you are taking the right equipment from the slag you leave on the battlefield. To this end, I believe the vast majority of playstyles can be condensed into 4 large categories, defined by 2 axes, all on how you wish to deal damage, for that is the imperative of Battletech combat. This isn't some fancy schmancy RPG. You aren't going to be eavesdropping on political rivals for information, or seducing the Smith's daughter. If you want something, you're going to have to liberate it from the cold corpse of your enemy, and that means violence. Those 2 axes break down like this. How safe you want to remain while you deal damage, and how patient you are while dealing said pain. Of course, there is some overlap between each box with its axis partner. Safe strategies will dedicate time and equipment to not being hit, and aggressive strategies will require focus on pinpoint application of damage, as opposed to just slinging it all around the field, for example. I don't mean to imply that these categories are exclusive. Your mechs will need to move no matter which strategy you choose. But the safe, aggressive, mobility-focused strategy will use it as a fundamental structure, not merely a consequence of combat. The safe, passive, attrition-oriented playstyle is content to take poorer shots, confident in its ability to make favorable long-term trades, focusing on longevity and reliability in design. Meanwhile, its polar opposite, the risky, aggressive, short-range company, will eschew most survivability choices for striking power, hoping to end fights quickly. And finally, the risky passive playstyle will roll forward like a massive boulder down a shallow incline, slowly, but irrevocably. Unless it runs into a bigger boulder, of course. For those unsure of their own preference, struggling to select the playstyle from this grouping, I recommend choosing one of the aggressive lines. They will generally result in more spectacular and entertaining mission results. Though spectacular and entertaining doesn't necessarily mean successful. But as this is a game first, I believe that initial enjoyment will be more beneficial than spending excessive time trying to perfect an unfocused mess. Though I suppose if you are here, that methodology may have already been attempted.
Affirmative.
Flailing about can absolutely be fun. I should know, I've done it often enough. Failing is mandatory. Determination, and thus success, is optional. By this point, you should have figured out enough about yourself to have an idea of what kind of battlefield strategy you wish to pursue. So when you slide into the mech bay, you should already be thinking about what aspect of that strategy you want this particular unit to perform. Is it a scout? A rock on which your enemies dash themselves to shreds? Does it support the action of others or initiate the action itself? Is it a generalist, designed to perform multiple roles? The weight class of the mech, relative to the rest of your established company, should clue you in to how best to use the current machine. Lighter than average mechs are usually assigned to roles like scout or backstabber. Heavier than average comprise your battle line or fire support units. If you're Lyran, that might mean the 90-ton Highlander does your scouting for the 3 flanking atlases. It's all relative. Toss on the armor to start. Don't be afraid to be generous. The goal is to see the enemy's insides on the battlefield, not your own. This isn't 20th century warfare. There are no battlefield medics. You gotta walk home with what you take, so make what you bring count. In Battletech, weapons deal discrete amounts of damage, and so I highly recommend keeping typical weapon impacts in mind when you allocate armor points. Here are a few standouts. The ubiquitous medium laser deals 25 damage per hit. The AC-5 deals 45. The standard inner sphere PPC chunks mechs for 50. The AC-10 will typically deal 60, and the terrifying Gauss rifle will do 75. There are weapons that deal more, the most common of which is the AC-20, which has a standard damage value of 100, but you will do well to memorize these values. I want to make a special mention that in this incarnation of the game, your head structure plus armor value is rated at 61 if you fully armor the head and have no structure hijinks on your mech. That makes you immune to single-hit insta-death from anything below a standard Gauss rifle. I would recommend not ever shaving armor from the head. For rear armor, think about what kind of hit you want to protect against, and then ensure you have at least that much armor per location. From there, move to the engine. How fast does this unit need to be to accomplish its role within the larger battle? This doesn't need to be perfect at the start, but you should at least have a movement profile in mind. 4.6 is pretty standard for line or fire support units, 5.8 for flankers and cavalry, 6.9 or faster for scouts, backstabbers, and melee specialists. Modify these numbers up or down as suits to your taste, though you'll find the positioning of these roles to each other remain fairly static. For example, I tend to favor a more mobile style of command, and struggle when I'm forced to field anything slower than 5.8, which is usually the movement profile of my line units. Ask yourself, does this unit benefit from an XL engine? Are you comfortable with the risk that generates for the unit and the company as a whole if you are forced to pull it out of the fight, or worse, lose it entirely? Can your wallet handle such a loss? If you need additional advice on the XL engine, I have an entire video dedicated to this wonderful piece of equipment, which you can find over here. Once you have the engine in, I strongly recommend that you first add any role-specific kit to the mech before you move on to weaponry. Your entire concept could be ruined by perfecting your loadout, ammo, etc., only to discover that your jackrabbit of a flanker has no jump jets. That's a lot of wasted time, and Gabi over here knows all about that.
Time is money, friend!
Scout with no stealth armor or ECM is going to be molten paste the first time it stumbles around a blind corner into the waiting caress of enemy laser fire, so put those items on first, and then look at guns. By this point, you should have a number under the tonnage of your mech, a number honor-bound warriors refer to as pod space, which roughly translates to room for bang-bangs for those who speak Surat. Now before you just go slapping barrels and tubes in your mech, stop for a moment and reconsider the role you chose for this machine. What does the expected battlefield action look like for this mech? Where does it expect to engage? How often? And for how long? Does it need to pull multiple duties across the breadth of a mission, or can it specialize more fiercely? From these questions, you should be able to decide the engagement profile for the machine. It is either an alpha baby, firing all its guns every time it pulls the trigger,
Fire everything!
or it needs to be range bracketed, firing a specific subset of its weaponry sometimes, and a different subset during others.
Give me a ping, Vasily. One ping only, please.
Constructing an alpha mech is simple, and forms the basis for the other, so I will cover it first. With this engagement profile, the mech will be expected to fire all the weapons it has each round for a time commensurate to its role. A backstabber might be expected to fire every other round, enabling you to overheat a little, as hopefully you killed your target with your first trigger pull. A line mech, on the other hand, will need to be able to handle sustained fire for multiple rounds, perhaps even the entire battle, so it should expect to remain mostly heat neutral while unloading everything it carries. This means that what is designated as overheating will depend on the expectations of the mech, and for how long it will need to maintain firing. A mech that doesn't rely much on movement will not care about such penalties from heat, and should be taken into account when thinking about the heat skill. Meanwhile, that evasive flanker will be dead meat if you push the red line while overextended, cutting its movement. A trick you can use to combat this is to drop a weapon or two from your rotation occasionally, giving your mech a chance to vent that unwanted thermal energy.
Roger that.
This brings us directly to the range bracketed mech, which takes this concept to a new level. Think of the range bracketed mech as basically two alpha babies in a single chassis. It alphas weapon group 1 when firing at enemies at range X, usually long range, and switches to firing all the weapons in group 2 when firing at enemies at range Y, usually short range. Each of these weapon groupings are functionally heat neutral when fired, so as long as you only ever fire one grouping per round, your mech can sustain its damage output without crossing your heat threshold. Any specific weapon can be a part of multiple groups. For example, you might fire the LBX-10 at both short and long range, but perhaps you choose only to fire the ER large laser beyond 400 meters, and have a pair of SRM-6 for short-range combat. Why use this system? It lets your mech take a more generalist role in combat, as well as putting your heat sinks to more efficient use. Your SRMs are worthless at 400 meters, so unless you have a plan to mitigate that lack, they represent wasted tonnage until you can close range. By adding the laser, you extend your damage potential at range without needing to add even more heat sinking capacity. So you will need to decide, is this a single grouping alpha baby? Or does this role benefit from being range bracketed? The answer to this question is fundamental for deciding which weapons will be installed. No matter which philosophy you choose, this underlying principle will remain. The weapons you fit should be most effective in the range band dictated by the role you selected. In other words, don't put an AC-20 on your backline fire support mech. If you decided to range bracket your mech, one of the brackets should still be the primary configuration, and should receive the bulk of the weapon tonnage, either in literal bulk via large, heavy-hitting weapons, or in the amount of sinks you use to mitigate the heat from your energy bias. I've been speaking for 10 minutes and I still haven't said a damn thing about weapons yet. So if you've lasted this long, you're about to be rewarded. And if you skip all the design philosophy straight to this section of the video,
Shame. Shame. Shame.
dessert tastes far better after all the flavors that come before it. Go watch. Almost every weapon in Battletech has some redeeming quality, whether that is heat efficiency, hole punching power, or longevity. That being said, and perhaps this is my grognard nature coming through here, you can bend and torch any AC-2 or small laser that finds its way into your holds. These are very niche weapon systems that I feel are better replaced with higher damaging, more versatile weapons. Backstabber? A medium laser does the same job and gives you quite a bit of extra range. Long-range fire support? Take an AC-5 instead. The extra tonnage is negligible for the added damage, and the true strength of the AC-2 is firing to extreme range. We're talking across the map type ranges here. You don't fight at those ranges in this game, like, ever. So look to replace those weapons with literal anything, and see a nice performance boost. As for the rest, I encourage you to experiment a bit and find what suits your temperament. Certain weapons are more likely to be included in specific roles or playstyles, so that will be a factor as well. In fact, let's bring that strategy chart back real quick. You will benefit from selecting the weapons that have characteristics that match your overall strategy, as I have included on this chart. I want to be clear that for longevity, that's full rounds of expected fire, so an Ultra AC-5 needs at least 24 shots banked to qualify, and that's for fairly efficient conversion to hits. The safer you play, the more you'll need to pack. I also want to state that of these 4 styles, I had the least experience with the risky passive playstyle, as it is the antithesis of my preference to mobility warfare. If you are selecting that strategy, I have much less to offer you in terms of advice due to my own inexperience. As a general rule, each weapon family has 2 things it does well, and 1 it does not. There are some caveats to these, of course, but by and large, if you are looking for weapons to fit your strategy criteria, this is probably the first place you should look. This is a very generalized chart, A medium laser doesn't have great punch in the grand scheme of things, but it's pretty decent for a single ton investment. Meanwhile, the PPC has fantastic punch at 50 damage per hit. The trade, of course, is that they are quite hot for what they bring to the table. I want to take this moment to reiterate that heat efficiency is related to the mech's expected performance on the battlefield, how long it needs to continuously pull the trigger. You have a small bank of heat to play with before you start seeing penalties, and depending on role, that bank may get larger or smaller. The lumbering Atlas that isn't interested in dodging doesn't give a shit about going 2 hexes instead of 3, but you're going to have trouble recruiting scout pilots if you consistently send them past the red line. Heat neutrality, on the other hand, refers to a mech that is able to fire continuously with no heat buildup in a given environment. Yes, given environment. Did you forget that planets are like women? Some are far hotter than others and will roast your chestnuts on an open fire if you aren't considerate of their challenges. So if you are designing your mech for a quote-unquote standard planet with moderate temperature, I'd recommend keeping an eye on the heat gauge in the mech bay. A full gauge indicates heat neutrality, while anything less is progressively toastier. I want to be clear here, however. The in-game tooltip assumes you have built an alpha baby. If you range bracketed your mech, expect this gauge to be at half or lower, and that's perfectly fine. It means a little more legwork for you, to verify that each grouping will not overheat your mech. But if you are playing Battletech, I'd assume you can handle a little math. If this is a struggle for you, you might want to get a lawyer to look over your mercenary contracts to ensure you aren't getting stiffed. With a more particular, I'd really recommend keeping your groupings within 8 to 10 points of heat neutrality. It's easier to manage, for one, not to mention it insulates you a bit against those aforementioned volcano planets you will eventually find yourself on. You can mouse over the heat bar in the mechlab to get exact values for your expected heat generation and sinking ability. If you are playing with the more advanced tech, know that the weapons with variable shell potential only account for some of their heat output. You'll need to examine the weapon card to be sure. The first number listed for damage is the damage per shell, and the last value is the number of projectiles fired per trigger pull. This is most noticeable for rotary autocannons, whose tooltips expect you to fire half of the maximum per round. You'll need to manually add the heat value listed to the mech's total heat tooltip if you care about staying neutral under full load. Kubaji, you still haven't told me exactly which weapons to use. You're right, I haven't. Meet me on the battlefield, and I'll show you which ones you should be using. If you survive.
Enemy down.